Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I am here with Samir Sayani. He is the global lead of AI partnerships and a bunch of other things too, Samir. I know you got your hands in a little bit of everything, um, but we'll welcome him to the show today. We're going to be talking about a checklist for buyers of AI-based services and market research. Samir's been heading our global AI effort, so I thought I'd bring him on and talk about a lot of the different things that I think buyers are thinking about, how Question Pro is approaching it, and then hopefully we can pick his brain on some exciting features that are coming up here at Question Pro. So Samir, welcome.
Thanks, Zen. Always good to be with you, man.
Awesome, cool, cool. Well, why don't we start it out around different criteria that buyers should prioritize when assessing AI service provider credentials. What are some of those things that you think that those buyers should look at?
Hey, thanks, Zen. So the the conversation, let's say, if I can frame it a little bit about today, is come out kind of this thought process came out of the latest document that ESOMAR put out around
Hmm.
20 questions, right? That any buyer of AI services and research should look into, and I think that's a very, very timely effort. If anybody of our users have not or listeners have not seen it, they should go and look at it. I think it's a pretty, it's an amazing document and very timely.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think it kind of spells out in a lot of interesting details the questions that we should be thinking about. But when I look through it, and based on my own experience, my own company that I set up, and obviously that's the reason why I'm with Question Pro, and I sold it to Question Pro,
Hmm.
is how do organizations should think about this, right? When they are going out there and thinking about procuring AI services and research, and that's not an easy job. I have to admit, it's not easy just because of the responsibility that it puts on organizations and the plethora now of options they see out there. So I have kind of synthesized this into three things, like literally, and I kind of all pivot into the notion of trust. And here are the three things that I believe organizations should be able to answer with relative confidence as and when they're trying to make this decision. So the first question is, can you trust the company that you are procuring the service from, right? The AI services from. Can you trust the process that the company has deployed to build AI solutions? And finally, can you trust that yours and your users' data will be protected? So if they can answer these questions, and we can go into more details, and I've
Hmm.
put some thoughts on that as well in detail. But we can go over those three items. But I think that's, to me, is the crux of your ability to select your AI partner.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point, and thank you for bringing up the 20 questions. I should have prefaced that before we dive right in, but I was so excited to get you on the show that I wanted to get into it. I did put the link to the 20 questions in the comments, so if you're wondering what we're talking about, go ahead and get a copy there. I know that we have a blog post out around the 20 questions where we answered a lot of these to help, I think, really answer these questions so that we're at the forefront of making sure that we have all the correct information out there. I think you mentioned something around trust, Samir. I think even going to some of these trade shows and research shows, I see a lot of AI companies that seemingly just kind of sprang up. Right? You're like, well, I haven't heard of these companies last week. What are they doing now? And I think trust does come down to it because at the end, it's a lot of it's their data that they're entrusting us with to secure and to keep safe. So I think trust does play a big factor there. So I like how you brought that up. What do you think in terms of alignment? How AI buyers can ensure that the services are aligned with their specific needs. I think this kind of maybe goes back to a lot of the startups were probably just AI, and they kind of maybe came into the research space because they saw some addressable market there. But what do you think around that as aspect of aligning with the specific research needs that the buyers might have?
No, that's a great question. So I think so I've talked to a lot of folks who are who make these decisions, or who have been looking to make those decisions, who are looking for companies who can provide this kind of service, or looking for providers. So a lot of time, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that decision makers tend to pivot between two extremes, right? Is from what I've seen before is first is who versus what, right? So the focus on who is saying it versus what is being said to them about the service, right? About the product. Uh, by who I mean that okay, this is a large brand, it's a large company. They have been around for a while, so they must be good, right? And so we can trust, and we can just simply go and go with them and make that decision. Then the other side is which is what versus who. So they get kind of sucked into the notion of okay, how well the company is able to sell the idea of what they're doing, right? How the marketing stuff is, how well they are articulating the product versus who's saying it. I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle between these two. So it's who matters, but what also matters a lot, right? Again, as it is tough. It's tough. It's not easy, especially if the buyers are not really well versed with some of the things that are out there, and things are moving so fast. And I have kind of in the document that you referred to as well, Dan, I've come up with like at the outset, right? If nothing else, look for three things, right? Look for three things in your early conversations, or you meet somebody at a conference, at an exhibition, and you start talking to this provider of AI services. Try to judge or try to guess or try to estimate three things about them, right? First is openness. How open are they to answer your questions about what they've done, how they've used data, what data they're using, where they procure the data from, how they've trained the things, what kind of safeguards they've built. So just assess, get a feel of how open they are to talk about it. Second thing, look for simplicity, right? How simply are they able to explain what it is that they've done, right? How they've built this, what the solution is, what it does, and how it kind of operates. So the simpler the language, it basically means they know what they're doing, and it's not that I've seen cases where people just build a wrapper app over OpenAI or existing LLMs and just make it as if it's the solved world hunger has been solved, right? And then the final thing is the notion of continuous improvement. So have they been improving, building iterations through collaborative efforts with the customers over a period of time? Is there a notion of making it better, right? Because as we all know, this is an evolving field. There's nobody can say I built a model that is 100% accurate any given point in time. And that consistency obviously is something that has to be achieved with hard work and rigor and iterative process. So that could be a good way to start. But if you are to come back to specifically ESOMAR's 20 questions that we talked earlier, there are three ways where I summarize what ESOMAR is trying to say, or give kind of guidance to the organization. First is look for the know-how and experience in market research, right? So whether the supplier understands market research in itself, right? How well versed they are. Do they have people who have experience in research or market research? Have they worked in those areas or those organizations? The second is, do they have a vision and understanding of the pain points? Do they understand how research ecosystem works end to end, and where what are the usual areas which require focus and where there will be needs to use AI or Gen AI? And then finally, I've talked about their openness to listen, learn, and change.
Yeah, no, I think you made all those are great points. I really like the fact that you said, can they explain it in a simple manner, right? I think that really, if I'm a buyer, I would really want to know, like, just explain it to me simply how this can help me out. Are they going to get lost in all the context and the different models and things? But really, how is this helping me at the end of the day? And I know you've thought about this pretty extensively, obviously, with some of the different applications that you're working on here at Question Pro. But what do you think some of those factors are that determine if a service is suitable for a particular research project? What are some of those factors?
Yeah, and this goes back to a little bit. This question kind of goes back to the previous one, right? So in the sense that the company that has built or is giving you or offering the services, how well do they understand the problem, right? So first of all, you need to know the problem. You need to define the problem for yourself. What is it that you're trying to solve when you are looking for an AI solution? And then see how that organization has defined that problem that they're solving with that product, and see if there's alignment, right? Because if the problem definition is not aligned, if you're trying to solve for different things, obviously, you may not find that sync that would solve the needs that you have in your research ecosystem. So that's, I think, is critical, right? That problem definition and alignment.
Right.
And the folks who know research would have done a better job of building a product that solves a very specific research need. The second thing is set goals, right? So what is your goal? Is it efficiency? Is it productivity? You want to save time in different key processes? Are there new insights that you're looking for? You want to go deeper, into exploring, consumer behavior? Do you want to be able to talk to your data to do different things? So I think set that goal and set that up front so that there's alignment. And when you go again talk to the supplier, make sure that those goals are set and understood. And then obviously the next step is evaluate the input. So who's the team who's working on it, what their capabilities are, what kind of processes they have put into place, what kind of governance mechanisms they have, what tools they are using, to what tools they've deployed. And by tools, I mean the models, the LLMs that they are using to build the solution. And then finally, test the output. A lot of times it's a very commonsensical test. So if you are looking, for example, to let's say predict sentiments, then you can have a bunch of your colleagues look at some of the output and say, okay, that makes sense or not. Now, every human may have a different perspective on sometimes on things, but some things are very, very obvious. To just do a common sense test on the output and make sure that it fits into what you are looking for, and there is no hallucinations, or there are no not the work not done properly.
Right. No, that makes sense. I like what you said around have goals. I think a lot of people that I've heard go into it thinking that AI can solve all their problems, and without having like these specific areas where they really need help in their research. So I like that you're focusing it there. Kind of shifting gears, like once you figure out that it's fit for purpose and that it's going to work, there's obviously a whole slew of ethical considerations, transparency in the models and so forth. What are some of those considerations that you feel organizations need to address and be upfront with?
Well, that's a big one, right? Because that's what it really, the crux is, that what it boils down to. And it's also it's the one that is harder to test upfront or validate upfront as well in all its entirety, right? Just because of the fact that you can't really go in and or you cannot go back in time and see how they've actually built something, or you cannot really go into the system and see how things are moving from one place to the other. Where is the system, where is the data flowing through, and what are the third-party applications where data might be moving to, and so on and so forth. But there are certain things that I think that the buyers of the services could do early on, or at least ask for early on. And there are some things which can be tested or can be evaluated at the outset. I think the first one I would put is human in AI, right? So when I say human in AI, and is basically from two ways: human involvement in terms of overviews, review of things and validation of things, but also human in the data, right? In terms of what kind of data is being used and representation, and so on and so forth. Duty of care. So is there like a process that the organization has put in place of validating, checking, testing, iteration, and guardrails that they have put in, making sure that at least what is known or what can be envisioned in terms of where things could go wrong, it's been identified, and it actually is being documented in some shape and form, and at least has been talked about in their presentation, that this is how they have put the duty of care in their work. The second is the third one is the opt-in, opt-out options, right? So a lot of times what happens is that organization, when they put in their data, they have no way of giving consent to, or opting out of
Mm.
not being that data not being available for use, without any restrictions. So at least as long as there is, and there are different ways to do this. There is not like a button that you can in and out of, but there are different
Mm-hmm.
ways in which at least you should feel that confidence that you have that option available to you, with your data. Is PII handling, right? Personally identifiable information. So
Mm-hmm.
again, this is easy to test. You can test whether anything then the output shows any PII, and depending on the use case, because again, there are different use cases around
Right.
PII. I've talked to clients who want some of the PII in there. Um, in some cases, they don't want it, so it depends on the use case. But in general, there has to be a way, at least, that they should know that organization has the means to do this, to mask it if need be, right? Um, do they have privacy policy? Is there an AI governance document
Mm-hmm.
that is not only available but is shared among throughout the organization, which means that there's a culture of understanding the importance, of those things. Has there been any independent reviews that they have undertaken where maybe an academic has looked at some of the processes? What
Mm-hmm.
kind of synthetic data, if anything, has been used to train their models, right? And that, I know, in itself is a huge topic, it's an evolving topic around the use of synthetic data. But obviously,
Yep.
it's a very important one, just because we don't want to live in a world where models are being trained using synthetic data, which then produces an output, and then that output again goes as an input to other models. So we
Yeah.
don't, obviously,
Yeah.
nobody wants to live in that world.
Yeah.
So some of those things
No,
are
it's a
questions that,
right.
yeah.
I mean, it's a fair point, especially around synthetic data. So I moderated a panel recently, and there was three people on it. One person said that's a hard stop on synthetic data. They don't want any part of it. The second person said, yeah, I can kind of dip my toe in the water there. And the third person was like all in under the right use cases. So it was like across the spectrum, it was like differing of a differentiation of opinions between the three. So it's kind of interesting around that synthetic data. I think that's a whole topic in itself that I'm sure we can dive into at some point, but it is interesting there for sure.
Yeah, and I
But
think that's an important one also, Dan, because just because, I mean, we need to also understand the fact that at some point, I think there's going to be some conversation in the industry about access to data, use of
hmm
data, and then the
hmm
need for synthetic data. Because
right.
so I was talking to a few folks a few days ago, representing different industries, about how we have evolved as humans, in terms of our willingness to share information about ourselves,
hmm
as if we feel there is a benefit at the end of it to us that would accrue to us by doing so, right? So I asked some very weird questions about, hey, would you, for example, let your kids do homework on using Gen AI, and or
hmm
would you write your next note to your partner, and on your anniversary using Gen AI, and very personal
hmm
stuff, which obviously would
right.
require you sharing information as well, obviously your personal information. And surprisingly, the answer was, in some cases, yes, right? So
Mm.
I think things are shifting, and so I think as an industry, um, and I think Question Pro obviously would be I think we should be the ones who should be leading this conversation also, is to
hmm
have this conversation as an industry about this notion of how do we make sure that data access is there, um, but also obviously with the right safeguards, and then what kind of and what volume of synthetic data could or should be in play. So I think that's the conversation that industry is moving toward, but it needs to happen now.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And it goes back to the transparency around these things, right? And being transparent around the models, and is it first party data, is it third party? What model is it? Did you create your own model? Are you using OpenAI or some other source? What do you think around? What do you think about that? Is like, why is that important when we're talking about AI research and how it can be enhanced? The transparency notion. Why is that? Why is that important? Do you think?
I mean, I mean, obviously the fact that we want to know what we don't know, obviously that curiosity is there, right?
Yeah.
And it obviously stems from what kind of accountability we have, what data authorities we have to allow, because any AI or Gen AI model is by its nature is data hungry, right? So it needs massive
Hmm.
data for it to improve, for it to do what it's supposed to do. And so a lot of times, obviously, the data custodians are wary of that because they want to control where the data goes, where it sits, who has access to it, and we know for good reasons because we have seen lots and lots of situations where companies have lost their reputation. There have been penalties obviously
Hmm.
involved if that data obviously is not used correctly or misused, which is an extreme case,
Yep.
which we have not seen that yet from an AI Gen AI perspective, at least with larger reputable organizations. But
Hmm.
that obviously in the back of mind that remains a risk. The second bit I think is this whole bit about the explainability bit, right? As you mentioned, which data has come. Is it representative? Is it good data? Is it bad data? Is it
Hmm.
do they even have the legal right to use that data? And then how does it actually models to predict whatever outcome that it predicts? Because obviously a lot of decisions have to be made as a result of those things. Now I have to remind everybody, and we all to remind ourselves too, that AI has been around for a while, right?
Yeah.
It's
That's a
not
fair point.
per se a new phenomenon, right? So,
Yep.
but it's just that I think with open AI and all of that, it's just taken, and Gen AI obviously it has taken a little bit of a what some people perceive to be a very new or a different turn.
Hmm.
But this phenomena has been around, and I think people in the know somehow some of that works. But because of all this widespread use of or access to Gen AI and Open AI, I think there have been more and more questions around. Okay, how is this happening? Especially when we are seeing a lot of hallucinations in the data that are coming out
Hmm.
from OpenAI sources. So I think that just pushes that question even harder. That okay, we need more transparency, which is what we do. But as I said, there is going to be a trade-off eventually that needs to be accrued as to between what is the fair access to data, how to treat the PII, and and as we have seen in Dan, in our work, there are
Hmm.
times when actually customers talk about or mention in open ends in surveys personal information. They give that
Hmm.
information because they say, hey, here is my number, here's my account, call me and solve my problem, right?
Right.
And they basically freely give away that information because they want their problem to be solved. And
Hmm.
so what are the guardrails around that, and what are the principles of openness around how that information is treated is something that we need to think about too. But absolutely, that is critical. How that information is used, or any of the information is used, is critical. And I think going forward, what's also going to happen is we're going to have mechanisms, regulations, or ways in which there will be protocols to test models, right? There'll be models that will
Hmm.
test models about it, the quality, the validity, the transparency, the use of data without compromising IPs. I think that's where we are heading eventually.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense, and everybody agrees that this model is, checks for certain kind of biases and things like that. So I think, that makes a ton of sense from a logical standpoint and governance. What in terms of, AI is obviously, like you mentioned, it's been around for a long time. It's not a new phenomenon by any means. What level of human involvement do you feel like is sort of essential for when you're developing and then utilizing these AI systems?
Oh, I think it's probably the most important
Yeah.
element, because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's for the humans, by the humans, and it needs to benefit humans, right?
Yeah.
So and as I mentioned earlier, right? There are two sides to it, or two components of human involvement. One is, obviously the humans building, reviewing, controlling um, the model itself, uh,
Hmm.
and the other, and probably also very important element, is the human in the data. So we need to make sure that the data that is being used to train these models is human generated and representative, right? I
Hmm.
mean, we have seen, and we know that there are gaps in OpenAI in terms of data being representative. I mean, those are very fairly documented
Hmm.
issues as well. And what it does, obviously, is that it then creates some inherent bias in the use of that data. So I think we need to make sure how, and this is really where my earlier point about, is it just a wrapper app,
Right.
whatever
Yep.
OpenAI produce, or somebody has taken the pain and the cost and the time to actually work on those gaps and make sure that some of those um, issues with those kind of applications have been removed, or have been covered for. And I think that's really what differentiates the
Yeah.
folks who trust and the folks, obviously, who we should not trust.
Right. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And then maybe talk about some specifics about what we're doing here at Question Pro, some examples of where this human oversight is taking place. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit for me?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I love to, because it's something which
Yeah.
is very, very, very close to me, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the pathos AI, which is around predicting sentiments and emotions. And so when we first started it, we kind of said, okay, let's use something that is one of the top tech companies in the world, global giant, has produced, and that would be a good place to start our journey into predicting sentiments. And when we started to kind of dissect some of the ways in which the output was coming, we were not very happy with the fact that it's able to represent all the different human conditions around the world. So then we said, okay, you know what? We need to change that. We need to go back and basically create something from the scratch of our own. And we
Hmm.
used our Question Pro associates from around the world, representing different nationalities, age, gender, different situations, different kind of orientations, just to make sure that when we build our model, we are we are covering, first of all possible human conditions, and ensure wide representation, right, as much as possible. So it's actually, we took the pain and the time again,
Hmm.
and the cost of it, to get it right, and make sure that we are, and sometimes it's personal decision that a company makes, right? The
Hmm.
results may or may not be very obvious or very clear to the end user, but I'm of the personal belief that when you put something on the table, you got to be ready to stand behind it 100% and say, you know what, that's what it is.
Right.
And I think that's what we try to do, and what we tried to do in this case, for example. And that human involvement was key.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great point on all of those. Samir, as we wrap up, what are maybe three things that you're excited about that Question Pro is working on now?
Oh, we have. So what, Dan, we are kind of, we've done this whole mapping with lots of discussions internally as to where should we really focus. And what I'm
Hmm.
really, really passionate about is that we're starting from the start of the funnel, which is developing a questionnaire. So we built a very nuanced tool, which basically gets you going, 70-75% on any kind of topic that you want to choose on in terms of research, and it will produce a fairly nuanced, complex questionnaire.
Hmm.
To at the end of the funnel, where you've done the research, you've ton of research, you don't know how to use that research going forward. So we have built what we call Insights Hub, where you can actually talk to your data, search data, build different kinds of stories out of that data, and make it, get much more ROI from that data than what you've done in the past. And
Hmm.
the third thing I would say is this now context-based sentiment model. So it's not just based on what the person is saying, but it's also based on the question that is being asked. Because we know,
Hmm.
depending on the
Hmm.
question, the answer could mean something completely different. The same answer could mean something completely different based on the question asked. So we have now working to launch that very, very soon. Context-driven sentiment prediction.
Awesome. No, that's great. Hey, Samir, thanks so much for joining me today. I hope the audience found this helpful around, things to ask your vendors. Again, at Question Pro, we've answered all these questions, not only in blog posts, but also in the documents and things that we share with our clients and prospects around AI. So the link for the 20 questions is in the comments. Make sure you download that. It's a great resource, a publication, as Samir mentioned. This is what we went off of in answering all of these questions. So with that, hey, Samir, thanks again. I appreciate you taking the time to join me on the show here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted.
Awesome.